John Newton was the son of an English sea captain. When John was 10 years old, his mother died, and he went to sea with his father. The boy learned the sea backward and forward, and at the age of 17, he became rebellious against his father, and he left the ship and began living a very wild life. Eventually, John took a job on a cargo ship that carried slaves from Africa to America. He was promoted rapidly and soon became captain of the ship. Newton never thought to ask whether slave trade was right or wrong. He just did it. It was an effective way to make a living. Then one night, a violent storm blew up at sea. The waves grew to the size of mountains. They picked up Newton's ship and threw it around like it was a toy. Everyone on board was filled with panic. That prompted Newton to do something that he hadn't done since leaving his father's ship. He prayed. Shouting at the top of his voice, he said, "God, if only you save us, I promise to be your slave forever." Well, God heard his prayer and the ship survived. Unlike Newton, who chose to live a kind of wild life, Job, in our first reading, was living a beautiful life. He was doing everything right, and he found himself in the middle of a storm. Job does everything right, and Job lost everything good. You know, it's one thing to be in the storm because you know you messed up, like Newton, who was not living a very good life. Yeah, it's my fault. You know, we have that kind of cliche saying, everything happens for a reason. Well, sometimes that reason is, I'm stupid and I make dumb decisions. But sometimes you find yourself in the midst of a storm, even though you know you've done everything right. Have you ever been in that place where, yeah, you know, you messed up and you can say, yep, I was stupid, bad decisions. But then there are those other times when you can honestly say, I was doing everything right. I was trying, and I'm still in the middle of a storm. You know, I'm really working hard to be a good, and I still got sick, or my family member got sick, or I lost my job, or they lost their job. We were trying to do everything right. Or I was trying to be a good spouse, but the marriage is just falling apart. Or I was trying to be a good parent, and the kids are just, well, I don't know, they're just out of control. I was trying to be good, and I found myself in the midst of a storm. Well, it gets even worse in the gospel, because the disciples are in the boat, and they're in the storm. And you have to ask yourself the question, why are they in this particular storm? Well, the answer is that Jesus told them to be there. Remember, at the beginning of the gospel, it said, get out into the boat, and we're going to cross to the other side. Well, imagine if you are one of those fishermen, and you grew up on the Sea of Galilee. You could probably read the signs of nature, and you could realize there's a storm coming. And so Jesus says, go out on the sea into the coming storm in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. So the only reason they're in this particular storm is because Jesus says, I want you to go out into that storm. The only reason you're in that storm is because you're doing exactly what Jesus told you to do. Now, if that was the case in our lives, we would have the same question the disciples had. Lord, don't you care? Don't you care about us? Don't you care that we are all about to die? And you know, that question, unresolved, will lead to resentment. And resentment is deadly. And so this is why, in the middle of the storm, you and I need courage. Not only courage to endure the storm, but courage to run into or to enter the storm. You know, I came across this great analogy between cows and buffalo. You know, what do cows do when a storm is coming, when they sense that a storm is coming? Well, they do what we think is the wise thing to do. They walk away from the storm. And that seems to make sense. But what does that do in the long run? Well, it makes the storm last longer, because as they walk away from the storm is moving with them. And so the storm is only going to get longer for them. They're in the storm for a longer period of time because their goal is just to escape, to get out of the storm. Now, buffalo do the exact opposite. When they sense that a storm is coming, they go right into it. They face the storm. Now, they're not being cowardly or rash, but they realize that this storm is here. Let's face it. There's no escape. It's here, and we have to engage. That's courage. Because if they engage it, the storm's going to end quicker. So let's go back to the disciples. They're in the storm, and they say, "Lord, do you not care?" That's resentment on the part of the disciples. So how are we going to engage? In the middle of resentment, one of the things we need to do is we need to get curious. We need to start asking questions. Why am I feeling this way? Why did I expect a different outcome? Why did I not expect there to be a storm? Or the biggest question of all, while you're in the midst of a storm, how is God calling me to respond? You see, to be curious, because courage is the remedy for resentment. So in the gospel, Jesus helps the disciples to get curious. He starts asking them questions. Why are you terrified? Which we could imagine they're thinking, okay, Jesus, we get it. You're a carpenter and wood floats, but we're fishermen and we know people sink, and so we're terrified. So basically, Jesus is asking the question, why are you terrified? The answer, because this could kill us. The storm that you brought us into has the potential to end every one of our lives. So you see, that's a really good question, but it's also a really good answer that we receive. And the next question is, do you not yet have faith? That's what Jesus asks. Well, faith is trust in a person, trust in Jesus Christ. In other words, Jesus is saying, you had trust in me when it was sunny and not stormy. You had trust in me when I fed the 5,000. You had trust in me when it was all these other circumstances. But do you not have the kind of trust in me that goes into a storm? So what Jesus is really saying is that you just started following me, but for the rest of your lives, I will be sending you out into storms. You just started following me, and you may not realize it, but for the rest of your lives, I will be sending you out into storms. And you will have the choice to escape, to run away, and hold on to resentment, or to engage, to run into the storm, to have courage. Christians do not run away and shrink back when they encounter storms. Christians have faith and they preserve their souls. Everyday courage runs into the storm. You know, the first line of the book of Job that we heard, the first reading, says this: "The Lord addressed Job out of the storm." What does that mean? Well, that means that God is already in the storm. And then in the gospel it says that Jesus was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. Well, that means that Jesus is in the storm. So you see, as Catholics, we are called to live with everyday courage and with Jesus to run into the storm, because we knew what Job knew, and we knew what the disciples knew. We run into the storm because Jesus is in the storm. And this is what John Newton realized when he reached land after making that prayer. And then he kept his promise to the Lord, and he quit slave trade. And later he studied for ministry, and he was ordained a pastor of a small church in Olney, England. And in that church, he won fame as a preacher and as a composer of hymns. One of the most moving, probably one of the most famous hymns that Newton wrote is the one in which Newton praises God for the gift of conversion. I have a hunch that you all know it. And if you would, sing along with me. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. 'Twas blind, but now I see.